Okay, let's unpack this. Real estate investing, especially here in Canada, can feel like you're trying to navigate a maze blindfolded while someone shouts confusing directions from, I don't know, a TikTok video.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
You see headlines, you hear stories, and it's just easy to get information overload, isn't it? It's not quite like a hot stock tip your uncle gives you. It feels, well, bigger, more permanent, maybe a little scary even.
Absolutely. There's so much noise out there, so many conflicting opinions, and figuring out how to translate all that into a structured plan, understanding the actual mechanics of buying and owning property as an investment here in Canada.
Yeah.
That's where a lot of people get stuck.
Yeah.
It feels like this massive undertaking, and you definitely need more than just vibes or what worked for your buddy 5 years ago.
Exactly, and that's really why we're doing this deep dive today. We're trying to pull out the core wisdom, the most important nuggets, from a resource that's actually designed to cut through that noise and give you a practical framework. We're diving into the book Brick by Brick. Buy your first house, collect rent, dodge headaches, and build real estate wealth. A step-by-step playbook for building wealth through, in Canada, by Harry Vadalkar and Mahesh Menon.
Right.
Think of this deep dive as like your shortcut to understanding their specific, really actionable approach to building wealth through real estate.
And Harry and Mahesh bring a really powerful blend of experience to this whole topic. Harry, he comes from the world of capital markets, fintech, and importantly, he's actually taught finance to thousands of students. So he gets the theory, the big picture financial concept.
Right, the academic side.
Yeah, and the behavioral biases that can, trip people up.
And then you pair that with Mahesh, who's got, 2 decades of serious hands-on property investing experience right there in Alberta.
Exactly. Boots on the ground.
He specializes in long-term rentals, value-add projects. He's been in the trenches, dealing with the practical stuff, market cycles, and, yeah, as they put in the book, every kind of tenant drama imaginable.
Oh, I bet. So their philosophy is this great mix, right? You've got the academic and financial market rigor from Harry combined with Mahesh's real-world, this is how it actually works on the ground kind of experience. It makes for a very no-nonsense, distinctly Canadian approach to building wealth through property.
So our mission today, using excerpts and insights directly from their book, is basically to guide you through their key principles, their strategies, and some really important warnings they give. They are super clear. This is not about getting rich quick. They position real estate investing not as some kind of gamble, but as a business you build deliberately, one step at a time, brick by brick.
And they are incredibly upfront about their crucial disclaimer, which, yeah, we should definitely echo right at the top here.
Absolutely.
Before you make any big financial decisions related to real estate, and these are significant decisions, you absolutely must consult a qualified professional, someone who understands your unique individual financial situation.
Right. Someone who knows your actual life, not just the general principles from a book someone else read.
Exactly. Your personal advisor is key.
And yes, for anyone wondering, the book does mention a rather specific raccoon incident during a property inspection out in Red Deer.
Oh, really? The raccoon story made it in.
It did. Apparently, no raccoons were harmed, but one did successfully make off with a granola bar. So the takeaway is wisdom and a good spreadsheet are required.
And maybe also robust snack security during property visits.
Definitely lock up the snacks, especially from enterprising raccoons.
Always.
So let's start right where the book does, with the core philosophy. Why real estate? In a world full of investment options, with headlines constantly screaming about prices and rates, why does this book argue it's still the best long-term wealth-building tool for most Canadians?
Yeah, it's a fair question. They set the stage really well with this story they call The Ballad of Red Right and Barty Wrong.
Ah, yes, Reggie Barty.
This story is just a perfect and frankly pretty vivid illustration of their central theme. You need to approach real estate with brains, with solid analysis, not just blind hope or emotion.
Right.
So picture Calgary back in 2014. The market was kind of panicking because oil prices were dropping dramatically, right? Most people were hitting the brakes, feeling really nervous.
But not Reg.
Yeah.
The book describes Reg as someone who found happiness in spreadsheets and really understanding long-term market fundamentals.
A rare breed.
Maybe. While others were panicking, maybe clutching their Timbits a little tighter, Reg was doing actual research. He understood the market numbers, he knew his own financial limits, and he focused on the underlying value of the property itself, not just the immediate market sentiment.
Exactly. So instead of reacting to all that fear, Reg calmly went out and bought a $600,000 house in a solid, established neighborhood. Now, at the time, his friends probably thought he was absolutely nuts, right? Buying into a market that seemed to be tanking.
Sure.
But Reg's focus was purely on those long-term fundamentals, things like location, property type, the underlying economics of the city, not the immediate price swings.
And the outcome today.
Yeah.
The book points out that same house is conservatively valued at, what, a cool $1 million now?
Nice.
But maybe even more importantly for Reg's strategy, it's generating an 8% rental yield. So a steady, predictable stream of cash flow coming in month after month. His financial foundation, built not on speculation but on careful due diligence, is now described as Fort Knox.
Fort Knox built on spreadsheets. Now contrast that with BRRRR over in Toronto in 2022. The market there was incredibly hot, right? Described in the book as hotter than a ghost pepper vindaloo.
Huh. Love that description.
Barty didn't do research. He felt the market was booming. He saw people around him seemingly making easy money, and he got hit with extreme FOMO, that fear of missing out.
They have a great line about it. Fear of missing out wasn't just a feeling, the book says. It was practically a municipal bylaw in Toronto at that time.
Totally. Barty was fueled by this latte-induced optimism, the belief that prices in the GTA could only go up, and just the general frenzy. So he leaped into the market, bought a $1 million house that was apparently beyond his means.
Oof.
Stretching his finances incredibly thin, all while planning to flip it quickly for a profit.
And the book kind of alludes to an unhappy ending for Barty, right? Especially as the market cooled off.
Yeah, it doesn't spell out the exact ruin, but the implication is clear. The core difference between Reg and Barty is just stark. Reg relied on research, solid numbers, understanding the long-term picture. Barty relied on feeling, on hope, and basically just following the crowd's momentum.
So thinking about Reg's success and Barty's struggles, what are the specific principles, the underlying advantages of real estate that the book argues still make it the best long-term wealth-building tool for most Canadians, even with all the current headlines?
Well, they lay out several key benefits. The first one they really hit on is its role as an inflation hedge.
Right, protecting against rising costs.
Exactly. The book paints inflation as that sneaky Grinch that silently eats away at your purchasing power. So while cash sitting in a low-interest savings account, or worse, under your mattress like some, artisanal cheese you forgot about, loses value as prices rise, real estate tends to keep pace with or even outpace inflation over the long term. As the cost of things goes up, generally, property values and rents tend to increase as well. It acts like an inflationary life jacket for your wealth.
Which connects really nicely to their point about forced savings.
Yeah.
They use a great analogy here.
Yeah.
It's like a gym membership you actually use.
Right. The one you don't skip.
Exactly.
Right.
When you make your mortgage payment each month, a chunk of that, especially as time goes on, goes towards paying down the principal loan amount.
Yeah.
It's this disciplined, unavoidable bill that forces you to build equity in your property.
Yeah, that money you might otherwise, fritter away on concert tickets or the latest gadget or whatever.
Or more artisanal cheese.
Or more cheese. Instead, it's turning you from just a renter into an owner who's building a significant, tangible asset, almost by accident, because the bank basically makes you show up for your saving sessions.
Then there's leverage.
Yeah.
This is a huge one in real estate.
Critical concept. It's the ability to control a large, valuable asset, the property, with a relatively small amount of your own cash, which is your down payment. The book uses this funny analogy of riding the bank's shoulders like a wealthy toddler.
I like that.
It's memorable, right? They give a specific example.
Huh?
Say you buy a $500,000 property and you only put down $100,000. That's 20%. If the property's value goes up by just 5%, that's a $25,000 gain.
So,
But that $25,000 profit is a massive 25% return on your initial $100,000 cash investment. This amplification of returns is incredibly powerful.
right. Although I guess it works the other way too if prices drop.
Oh, absolutely. Leverage is a double-edged sword. It amplifies losses just as much as gains if the market goes down significantly. Very important point.
And then there's what they call the Great Canadian Tax Cuddle. This is about the principal residence exemption, right?
Exactly. And it's honestly one of the most significant wealth-building tools available to Canadians. When you sell the home that has been your primary residence, the capital gain you make on that sale is usually completely tax-free.
That's huge.
It is. If you buy a house for $400K and sell it later for $700K, that $300,000 profit often stays entirely with you. The CRA doesn't take a slice. It's like the government giving you a little pat on the head and saying, well done for having somewhere to live, eh? Keep the change.
Only in Canada.
Pretty much. It's a massive advantage that other investments just don't typically have. Imagine if poor Barty in Toronto had actually made a profit on his flip attempt. If it was his principal residence, that part of his unfortunate adventure would have been tax-free. But alas.
Right. Small comfort, maybe?
Maybe. Finally, they highlight the role of increasing immigration and demographics. Canada consistently welcomes hundreds of thousands of new permanent residents every single year. These are people who need homes, places to rent, eventually places to buy.
Yeah. Basic supply and demand.
Totally. Add to that our own domestic population growth and shifting demographics. Millennials starting families needing more space, boomers downsizing or maybe upsizing somewhere else, more single-person households, and you have this constant fundamental and growing baseline of demand for housing right across the country.
Makes sense.
The book calls it basic human shelter math, arguing it's this persistent force, not some fleeting speculative crypto fad. More people needing homes generally means well-located properties tend to hold their value and appreciate over the long term.
So summing up this first section from the book, the core message seems really clear. Building wealth with real estate isn't about hitting some kind of lottery ticket overnight.
Definitely not.
It's about getting richer steadily over time. It's slow, it's solid, and its inherent advantages work best when you approach it with a clear head, solid analysis, and patience, basically, with brains, not blind hope.
Well said. The call to action here is really to try and ignore the short-term noise and headlines, grab your metaphorical hard hat, and start thinking about building that foundation brick by brick.
And that powerful message leads us perfectly into the next crucial piece the book really dives into. Mastering your mindset. They argue that your brain is maybe the most important piece of property you'll ever manage in this whole journey.
That makes so much sense because even when you have all the facts, all the numbers, you understand the principles, our own psychology, our biases can completely derail us if we're not aware of them.
Yeah.
The book highlights a few of these key biases to really watch out for. Overconfidence is a big one. They give it this great label, the I flipped one condo god syndrome.
I know that syndrome.
Right. Just because you had an initial success, maybe you got lucky in a really hot, fast-moving market, doesn't mean you suddenly possess some kind of cheat code or perfect foresight. It might have just been significant luck.
Totally.
They tell the memorable story of Chad, the condominium king, Carmichael.
Chad. The Oracle.
Apparently, Chad bought a pre-construction condo during a market frenzy so intense you literally could have sold a garden shed for 6 figures. He flipped it quickly, made a good profit, and instantly believed he was this real estate oracle with a golden touch. His ego, fueled by that easy win, just absolutely explodes.
Yeah, dangerous stuff.
Precisely. Riding that wave of overconfidence and ego, Chad started ignoring traditional market indicators, dismissing people who were more cautious as amateurs. He leveraged everything he could get his hands on for 3 more deals he was certain were guaranteed winners, right as the market started to cool off and conditions shifted.
Oh, boy.
The outcome, as the book describes it, is Chad now juggling mortgages, dealing with difficult tenants, and experiencing slow financial despair. The book stresses that the antidote to this bias is humility, a commitment to running the numbers every single time, no matter how good you feel, and taking time to sleep on big decisions instead of acting impulsively. The major warning sign here is planning your next move based purely on vibes and vague, unfounded optimism.
The vibes approach. Definitely something to watch out for. Another significant bias they point to is herd behavior.
Following the crowd?
Yeah, simply following the crowd, letting the momentum of others dictate your actions. They use that relatable image. If my cousin who can't spell ROI is buying a fourplex, maybe I should too.
It sounds funny, but it highlights how easily we can be swayed by what others are doing, especially when they seem successful, right?
Totally. The caution is clear. Just because everyone else is running in a certain direction doesn't mean they actually know where they're going, particularly if their advice comes from, questionable sources like a hairdresser's astrologer's boyfriend.
Definitely vet your sources. And probably the most potent form of herd behavior in a hot market is FOMO, fear of missing out.
Ooh, FOMO. The big one.
This is herd behavior's frantic, anxiety-driven cousin. It's that gnawing feeling that if you don't buy property right now, this instant, you will permanently miss your only chance to ever own property, especially when you see prices escalating like crazy.
And this is where Penelope Penny Pincher makes her first unfortunate appearance in A Cautionary Tale.
Poor Penny.
Penny had apparently saved diligently for years, doing everything right with her finances. But as she saved, prices just kept escalating, feeding that panic. She saw all the sold over asking signs everywhere, and in this FOMO-fueled haze, felt she had to jump in immediately.
Right. The pressure gets intense.
So she found the little bungalow of lingering questions. And in her rush, she waived all her conditions, financing, inspection, basically waives common sense.
Oof. But she got the house. That moment of triumph.
Triumph. Until, yeah, that rush came at a huge cost. The book details how the roof turned out to be a sieve leaking water, the wiring was this dangerous relic from the 1940s, and that settling scratching she heard in the walls wasn't settling at all. Squirrels, maybe?
Oh no, she was locked into a money pit because the fear of missing out on a house entirely overshadowed the critical need to wait and find the right house, one that didn't come with massive hidden problems. FOMO makes you rush important decisions, ignore glaring red flags, and often leads to overpaying for something unsuitable.
So, knowing these psychological traps are real, how does the book suggest we actually combat them?
Well, they emphasize the importance of riding the real estate wave without wiping out, which requires resilience through cycles.
Right, markets go up and down.
Exactly. The market isn't a straight line up. It goes through cycles. Much like Canadian weather, you have sunny growth periods, balmy stability, crisp cooling phases, and yeah, chilly winters sometimes. Understanding these cycles are normal rather than panicking every time a headline screams, crash is key. You need to cultivate the patience and perspective of a steady Sal, as they put it, not react like a panicky Paul who suddenly thinks starting an alpaca escape room is the only way to make money.
Alpaca escape room. Noted.
And this resilience is built by focusing on system stadium lights. Don't chase the fast, flashy, potentially lucky wins that put you in the spotlight briefly. Instead, focus on building a robust, repeatable system for finding, analyzing, and managing properties.
Okay, so what does that system look like?
It involves setting clear, measurable goals, defining your investment criteria and sticking to it. No buying that random sixplex in Moose Jaw just because it looks cheap if it doesn't fit your actual plan. Running the numbers not just when you're excited about a property, but again later when you're perhaps a bit hangry and thinking more clearly.
The hangry test. I like it.
It's important. It also means building your power team early on, your mortgage pro, your real estate lawyer, your inspector, and that crucial reality-checking friend who isn't afraid to tell you if a deal looks shaky.
Yeah, you need that person.
And finally, it means executing with discipline, not just chasing the dopamine hit of simply acquiring a property.
So your mindset is absolutely critical property, maybe even more important than the physical property itself. Getting your brain aligned with a disciplined, long-term approach sounds like step one.
Which naturally brings us to the actual financial engine you need to build, your financial fortress. The book really stresses that while mindset is crucial, your personal finances form the absolute base camp for this entire journey. You just can't play the game without the fuel, right?
Right. Where do they start with that?
They start with urging you to take a financial selfie, looking at your net worth with no filters allowed. Net worth is simple. Total value of your assets minus your total liabilities. The core lesson here is understanding what's actually building long-term wealth, like equity in a property, versus things that are just consuming cash, like, say, leasing a luxury car. They acknowledge that for many people starting out, looking at that balance sheet might feel like listening to a sad country song. But awareness is day one of the financial glow-up. The actionable step is straightforward. List all your assets, list all your liabilities, calculate the truth of where you stand financially right now, and don't panic. Just start from there.
Okay, awareness first. Then what? Budgeting.
Budgeting, yes, but framed as budgeting without losing the will to live. The book clarifies that a budget isn't about punishment or deprivation. It's more like a GPS for your money, guiding it towards your goals.
Right.
The lesson often learned here, they say, is that it's not always the huge expenses, but the small, daily, seemingly insignificant ones that can quietly sink your financial ship. The daily lattes and curated dog toy subscriptions for a dog you don't even own.
Guilty. Maybe not the dog toys.
They use Brenda's example, who managed to cut $800 a month from her expenses without becoming a total hermit, simply by tracking and making conscious choices. Actionable advice. Track everything you spend for 30 days, use an app, a notebook, whatever works, find your latte factors, see where your money is actually going, and then make conscious decisions to keep the things that bring you real joy and ditch the waste.
And absolutely essential for that financial fortress is your financial parachute, your emergency fund.
Crucial. Life is unpredictable, right? Jobs can disappear unexpectedly. Your furnace will die in the middle of a Canadian winter.
Guaranteed.
And that enthusiastic golden retriever might just chew through a critical piece of plumbing. You need a buffer, typically 3 to 6 months of essential living expenses socked away in an accessible, boring, high-interest savings account.
And remember Penny Pincher and her squirrel-infested fixer-upper from earlier?
Yeah.
Even with that problematic purchase, her prior commitment to saving an emergency fund, enough for 6 months of expenses, literally saved her. When that unexpected $6,000 roof repair bill hit, she was apparently able to calmly write a check from her emergency fund without going into high-interest debt or having to sell her car.
Wow. Okay, that's a powerful example. It prevented a significant property problem from turning into a full-blown financial apocalypse. The actionable here is clear. Aim for that 3 to 6 months of essential expenses and automate your savings, even small amounts like $25 a week, so it just happens automatically.
The book also tackles debt, the good, the bad, and the jet ski.
Love the jet ski edition.
They make the important distinction that not all debt is inherently evil. Bad debt, like high-interest credit card debt, is described as a financial vampire, actively plotting against your wealth. Good debt, like a mortgage on a strategically chosen income-producing property, is strategic leverage that helps you build an asset. And then there's jet ski debt, which is just frivolous consumption that doesn't build wealth.
Right. Know the difference.
Exactly. The real talk is, know exactly what kind of debt you have, understand its interest rate, and be honest about whether it's helping or hurting your financial story arc. Actionable steps. List all your debts by interest rate, prioritize slaying the high-interest credit cards first, slay bad debt, and only consider things like balance transfers if you've genuinely changed the habits that got you into that debt in the first place.
Makes sense. And finally, they discuss the Canadian credit score chachar. Your credit score is the gatekeeper to mortgage approvals and decent rates. It's crucial.
Super important.
The lesson is simple but vital. Pay your bills on time, every single time. And keep your credit card balances low, ideally under 30% of your limit. Don't max them out. Avoid applying for excessive store credit cards just to save 10%, like they're Pokemon, as the book says, as this can ding your score. They share Clarence's lesson that being mostly on time with payments is absolutely not a strategy the credit bureaus appreciate. The real talk here is, be boring, be predictable with your credit habits. The bureaus love that. Actionable. Set up automatic payments to ensure bills are paid on time, keep credit card balances low, and regularly check your credit report for errors that might need cleaning up. Building the solid financial foundation is presented as absolutely non-negotiable.
All right, so with your mindset aligned and your financial base camp established, what's the next big mountain to climb on this journey, according to the book? For many people, the biggest hurdle is saving that initial down payment, right? How do you fuel that dream and make it a reality?
Yeah, this is where the book gets into specific Canadian programs and tools, the power-ups that can significantly help. First and foremost, they shine a major spotlight on the FHSA, the First Home Savings Account.
The new kid on the block.
And a powerful one. They quite rightly call it the Beyoncé of savings accounts for first-time buyers because it offers multiple benefits. Contributions are tax-deductible going in, like an RRSP. Okay.
The growth inside the account is tax-sheltered, and the withdrawals used for a qualifying home purchase are completely tax-free, like a TFSA.
Right.
It's incredibly powerful.
Wow, triple threat.
Pretty much. The actionable advice here is simple. If you're eligible, open one ASAP and make every effort to max out that $8,000 annual contribution limit if you possibly can.
Then there's the more familiar RRSP homebuyers plan, the HBP.
Right. The book frames this as borrowing from your future self politely. They use the example of Raj, an engineer in Edmonton, who had diligently saved in his RRSP for retirement, but wanted to buy a condo sooner. He used the HBP to access his RRSP funds up to $35,000 per person, or $70,000 for a couple if both are eligible and have the funds tax-free for his down payment.
Or you have to pay it back, right?
Absolutely. The key is he's now meticulously repaying that amount back into his RRSP over 15 years. The pros of the HBP are that it allows you to access significant, otherwise locked-away funds tax-free for the purchase.
The cons are that you're temporarily depleting your retirement savings. You face taxes if you miss repayments, and you lose out on the tax-sheltered growth those funds would have generated within the RRSP during the loan period.
It's a trade-off.
It is. Their advice is generally to use it as a top-up or part of the strategy, not something to rely on entirely, and be absolutely committed to repaying it on schedule or face the wrath of the CRA, which sounds unpleasant.
Yeah, best avoided. They also briefly mention spousal RRSP coordination.
Yeah, just briefly, as a way to potentially double dip the HBP limit if you're married or common law and structure your contributions correctly over time. But they note this requires smart timing and planning at least 2 years ahead.
Go.
And the TFSA, the tax-free savings account, is your flexible MVP in this savings game. Contributions are after tax, but all income earned and withdrawals are completely tax-free. It doesn't give you the upfront deduction like the FHSA or RRSP, but it provides fantastic flexibility. The actionable. Use it if you've maxed out your FHSA or if you want more purchase optionality down the road.
So those are the internal savings tools. What about external help? The bank of mom and dad.
Right, the External Affairs Department, as they call it, tapping outside resources, but with significant caution. Gifts from family, the Bank of Mom and Dad, BUOMAD, are common for down payments in Canada. The book concludes this is okay, but crucially, the lender requires a formal gift letter.
Ah, the letter.
Yes. Penelope Pincher, making a more sensible appearance this time, apparently used a parental gift of $10,000 for a PEI cottage. The book stresses that the required letter confirmed it was a true gift with no expectation of repayment. This is vital to satisfy the lender and prevent that money from being counted against you as hidden debt. The golden rule here: lenders must see a true gift, the letter is mandatory, and the person giving the gift needs to fully understand it's a no-strings-attached gift.
Okay, clear rules there. And then there's co-signing. The book sounds pretty wary of this one.
Extremely wary. They tagged this option with a clear warning. With great power comes great responsibility and risk. Adding someone with stronger finances to your mortgage application can help you qualify, but they state very clearly it is fraught with peril.
Perilous.
They share the cautionary tale of Charlie's co-signing catastrophe in St. John's. Charlie agreed to co-sign for his cousin Vinny, whose finances were, as the book vividly describes it, a Jackson Pollock painting of chaos.
Not good.
Not good at all. Vinny lost his job and defaulted on the mortgage. Because Charlie had co-signed, the bank legally went after him. He was 100% responsible for the entire debt. Charlie's credit plummeted, and his own dreams of buying a boat apparently sank along with Vinny's finances.
Wow, so what are the dues then, if any?
The dues for co-signing are very, very few, according to the book. Only co-sign if you are genuinely prepared and financially able to take over the entire debt yourself without causing hardship to your own finances. Understand explicitly that it impacts your ability to borrow for yourself and, ideally, have an ironclad written agreement with the person you're co-signing for, though this doesn't protect you from the bank's claim.
And the don'ts.
The don'ts are many. Never co-sign if you have any doubts about the borrower's ability or willingness to repay, if it stretches your own finances thin, or if you're doing it just because they're family without fully understanding their financial picture and the risks to yourself. Lenders see a co-signer as equally responsible for every single dollar owed. Full stop.
Okay, message received loud and clear on co-signing. The book makes it clear, though, that while these programs and external sources can help, most of the heavy lifting for the down payment comes from your internal engine, supercharging your savings from within.
Absolutely. This is where you weaponize your budgeting skills from the Financial Foundation chapter, making it specifically the down payment diet edition of your budget. Brenda's brick-by-brick budget is the example here. She targeted the amount needed for an air-dry townhouse down payment, consciously cut things like fun money by 30%, became a meal prepping maestro, discovered the joys of free library books.
The library.
Yeah.
Underestimated resource.
Totally. She even made a down payment thermometer chart to track her progress visually. It's about focused, purposeful saving, not necessarily feeling deprived, but knowing exactly what that saving is for.
So the strategy is?
Set your target amount, calculate exactly how much you need to save monthly or weekly to hit that goal within your time frame, and then automate those transfers, prioritizing the FHSA first on payday. Make pay yourself first a non-negotiable command.
The actionable steps they give seem practical, too. Calculate realistically how long it will take you to save your target down payment amount using your focused savings rate. Set monthly checkpoints to track progress and celebrate those milestones. It helps keep motivation high.
Yeah, absolutely. And they offer a great quote to keep perspective. You don't need to keep up with the Joneses. The Joneses are leveraged to their eyeballs and Googling, what is a ELOC? Which brings us neatly to our next topic.
That is a fantastic and probably very accurate point about the Joneses. Okay, so let's imagine you've built that financial fortress. You've got your down payment ducks in a row, or at least a solid plan to get there.
Yeah.
Now comes the financing the mortgage itself. It's time to decode speaking lender.
Yeah, this is where you start navigating the language and options presented by banks and mortgage professionals. The book breaks down the basics really clearly, starting with the two main types. First, fixed-rate mortgages. This is presented as the predictable path.
Okay, makes sense.
Freya Fixed-Rate Ferguson from Fredericton, who apparently valued predictability above all else, chose this route. Her interest rate is locked in for the entire term of her mortgage, typically 1 to 5 years in Canada. This means her mortgage payment amount remains exactly the same, month after month, regardless of whether the Bank of Canada's key rate does a wild tango or, a sedate holly-gully.
The pros seem obvious. Budgeting bliss, payment certainty. It completely protects you if interest rates rise during your term, which offers significant peace of mind for many people.
Right. The cons are you usually pay a slight premium in interest rate for that predictability compared to variable rates at the time you sign, and you won't benefit immediately if rates happen to fall during your term, not until your mortgage comes up for renewal anyway, cue sad trombone.
Then there are variable rate mortgages, riding the wave.
Exactly. Victor Variable Ventures, Vadalkar from Vancouver is the example here. He was apparently comfortable with a calculated amount of risk and found the idea of a fixed rate a bit, vanilla. With a variable rate, his interest rate fluctuates with the lender's prime rate, which is influenced by the Bank of Canada's rate.
So your payment can change.
It can, or sometimes the payment stays the same, but the amount going to principal versus interest changes. The book notes that sometimes more went to principal when prime dropped, Victor did a happy jig, and other times if rates rose, his payment might increase, or less went to principal. A slight pinch, maybe less avocado toast that month.
Okay, so the pros of variable rates are that historically they've often worked out cheaper over the long term, and you benefit immediately if rates fall.
Right. The cons are the lack of payment predictability and the fact that your payment, or the amount of principal paid, can change, sometimes significantly, if rates rise sharply. It definitely requires a stronger stomach for uncertainty. The book emphasizes that deciding which is right for you depends entirely on your personal risk tolerance, your budget's flexibility, and maybe your outlook on where rates are headed, though they caution that economists often get this wrong.
You also need to understand the commitment conundrum when it comes to mortgages. Open versus closed. This choice boils down to your need for flexibility versus wanting the absolute lowest rate, right?
Pretty much. Open mortgages are described as the no strings attached, almost option. They come with a higher interest rate, but they give you maximum flexibility to pay off the entire mortgage or make large lump sum payments anytime without penalty.
Like if you're expecting a big bonus or inheritance.
Exactly. Ophelia Open Option O'Malley from Ottawa, who was expecting a large windfall from her booming artisanal dog biscuit business.
Dog biscuits again. It's a theme.
It seems to be. She chose an open mortgage so she could buy a condo now and pay it off entirely once the lump sum arrived. They're good for short-term needs if you anticipate a large amount of cash coming in soon.
Closed mortgages, on the other hand, are the let's get serious relationship. They are the most common type because they typically offer lower interest rates than open mortgages. But you are committed to that lender for the term of the mortgage, usually 1 to 5 years.
And the significant con is that they come with prepayment penalties. If you break the term early, for example, if you sell the property and the buyer doesn't assume your mortgage, if you refinance with a different lender before the term is up, or if you exceed your annual prepayment privileges, which usually allow maybe 10–20% extra per year.
Right, and those penalties can be huge. The book revisits Penelope Pincher for her second painful lesson.
Poor Penny, she's our cautionary tale champion.
Apparently. She got a 5-year fixed closed mortgage in her FOMO haze, and then 2 years later got a dream job in another province. When she had to sell and break her mortgage, she faced a massive interest rate differential, IRD penalty.
Yeah, they explain the IRD calculation simply as the difference between your fixed rate and the lender's current rate for a similar term remaining, multiplied by your mortgage balance and the time left on the term. They stress that this penalty can be thousands or even tens of thousands of dollars. Ouch! It's a very vivid illustration of why understanding those prepayment clauses is absolutely vital before you sign.
This leads to the question, why bother prepaying at all if there can be penalties?
Good question. The book explains the glorious math of interest savings. Every extra dollar you pay towards your principal balance, especially early in the mortgage term when most of your payment is interest, is a dollar that never accrues interest for the entire remaining amortization period. Mortgages are heavily interest front-loaded.
So prepaying saves interest over the long haul.
Massively. They provide a quick example. On a $400,000 mortgage at 5% over 25 years, with a payment around $2,326 a month, if you make an extra $10,000 lump sum payment in year one, assuming it's within your allowed prepayment privileges, it could shave almost 2 full years off your amortization and save you over $25,000 in interest over the life of the mortgage.
Wow, that's significant.
It really is. It's like finding a major shortcut on a long hike. You get to the destination faster and carry that heavy mortgage backpack for less time.
They also suggest simply considering accelerated payments, like switching from monthly to accelerated biweekly payments.
Yeah, it's a really simple tweak. This simple change means you make the equivalent of one extra monthly payment per year spread out painlessly. It adds up to huge interest savings and reduced amortization over time with minimal effort. Actionable advice. Just ask your lender about switching to accelerated biweekly payments.
Good tip. And if you're putting less than 20% down, remember that default insurance is required by CMHC, Sagan, or Canada Guarantee.
Right. You need to weigh the cost of that insurance, which gets added to your mortgage principal, versus potentially delaying your purchase to save up the full 20% down payment to avoid it entirely. It's a calculation based on your market, your savings rate, and your urgency.
So the mortgage section, in a nutshell, understanding your mortgage terms, rates, and flexibility options is like reading the nutrition label on sausage. Maybe not the most thrilling activity.
Probably not.
But it's absolutely critical for your financial health and wealth. Choose your mortgage like you would choose a long-term partner. Understanding, flexible where needed, and definitely not likely to charge you a giant penalty for moving on.
That's traditional financing covered pretty well, but sometimes the book acknowledges your situation or the specific property you're looking at doesn't fit neatly into the standard boxes of a major bank. That's when you might need to look at what they call creative and alternative financing, the more colorful tools in the financing shed.
Okay, this is a territory where your average bank lender might give you that look, like you've just grown a second head or something.
Pretty much. The first tool they discuss, and it comes with a big flashing red warning light attached, is ELOC's Home Equity Lines of Credit. They call it your house as an ATM, used with extreme caution.
An ATM secured by your house. Sounds risky.
It can be. It's a revolving line of credit secured against the equity you have built up in your home. It's like a giant credit card with a potentially lower interest rate, but the collateral is your entire house. It can be a fantastic tool for disciplined investors or a very slippery slope into debt trouble.
How do they illustrate that?
They present the duality of the HELOC using 2 characters. First, there's Helen's HELOC home run. Helen was a savvy financial manager. She had paid down a significant amount on her primary residence mortgage and built up substantial equity. She secured a HELOC and used a chunk of it responsibly for the down payment on a separate rental property, using strategy 1, accessing equity for investment.
Okay, smart use.
She used another part for a strategic kitchen renovation on her own home that genuinely increased its value. Strategy 2, smart home improvements. Crucially, Helen always had a clear repayment plan for the ELOC funds she used and never used it for frivolous spending. For her, it was a disciplined tool for wealth creation.
And the flip side.
Contrast that with Harvey's HELOC headache. Harvey was Helen's neighbor, and he saw the HELOC as simply free money. He maxed it out for things like vintage pinball machines, a golf cart, and funding his attendance at every poutine festival within driving distance.
Oh, Harvey.
The book notes Harvey often only made the minimum interest-only payments, which is dangerously tempting. That means you're not actually paying down the principal debt. His HELOC became this heavy anchor, essentially remortgaging his house for depreciating assets and, well, poutine.
So the mechanics are, you borrow against your equity.
Yeah, you can typically access equity up to a certain percentage of your home's value, around 65% as a standalone product, or up to 80% combined with your primary mortgage. It's revolving credit, meaning you can borrow, repay, and borrow again up to your limit. Interest-only payments are often allowed, which they warn is very tempting, but means you're just treading water on the debt. And HELOCs are almost always variable rates.
Pros seem to be flexibility, easy access.
Potentially lower interest than unsecured debt, yeah. They can be great for disciplined, strategic investors. The Smith maneuver is mentioned as an advanced strategy involving HELOCs for tax-deductible investment debt, but they stress consulting a specialist advisor for that. The temptation. It's just too easy to use this accessible debt for non-asset building consumption. The variable rate adds uncertainty, and the biggest risk is that your home is the collateral. You could literally lose it if you default. The book's cool message? Use with extreme caution.
Okay, so What about when traditional lenders, the A lenders, like the major banks and credit unions, simply say, no way, A, because maybe the borrower's credit isn't perfect or the property itself is a bit unconventional?
Right. The book discusses B lenders, alternative lenders like trust companies, often a step down from A lenders, and then private lenders and MICs, mortgage investment corporations. MICs basically pool money from multiple private investors to lend out on mortgage security.
And who uses these?
These lenders are often used when the borrower or the property just doesn't fit the standard boxes the big banks require. The book introduces two characters who use these options. Peter's peculiar property, his dream was to buy a decommissioned lighthouse on the coast banks, said no comparable sales, structure too unusual.
A lighthouse, okay.
And Brenda's BRRRR Bridge 2, she found a fantastic buy Reno rent refinance deal in Winnipeg, but needed to close fast and fund the renovations before she could season the property and refinance with the traditional A lender. Both turned to Paul, the private lender, who works with the MIC.
And Paul, the private lender, isn't scared by lighthouses.
Apparently not. Paul's role, and that of MICs and private lenders generally, is that they're often not scared by unusual properties or situations needing quick bridge financing. They offer short-term mortgages, often 1-3 years, that are based more on the property's equity and potential value after improvements than solely on the borrower's perfect credit score or standard income documents.
But there's a catch, right? The cost.
Absolutely. The crucial trade-off here is cost. These loans come with significantly higher interest rates. The book quotes ranges like 8–12% versus a bank's 4–6% depending on the market at the time, and substantial fees. Lender fees of 1–3% of the loan amount plus potentially broker fees.
Ouch.
But what they offer in return is speed, flexibility, and a willingness to fund deals that banks simply won't touch. They are used for situations like bruised credit or unconventional income like self-employed, unique properties, short-term needs like bridge loans or renovation financing before a planned refinance, critical closing speed requirements, and sometimes for foreign investors or new immigrants who don't have an established Canadian credit history yet.
So it's a tool for specific situations, usually temporary.
Exactly. The book emphasizes that private lending is almost always intended as a temporary solution, a bridge to get the property stabilized or improved to a point where it can qualify for traditional A-lender financing rather than a long-term strategy due to the high costs. They also stress the importance of doing your due diligence on the private lender or MIC itself before signing anything.
The conclusion on creative finance seems vital. Yes, these tools can unlock opportunities that traditional lending misses, and they are valuable in specific situations.
Right, but creative often means complex and costly. The further away you get from the main banks, the more absolutely crucial it is to understand every single nuance, fee, term, and risk involved. They issue a stark warning. Never sign what you don't completely understand, and surround yourself with a power team that includes a mortgage broker who understands alternative lending and an experienced real estate lawyer comfortable with these types of deals.
So you've navigated the financing maze, perhaps even using some of these creative tools. Now you've found a potential property that looks promising. How do you actually know if it's a good investment, if the numbers truly make sense? It's time for the analysis essentials.
Yeah, the math part. The book dives into the key metrics serious investors use. The first one they cover is cap rate, or capitalization rate. It's a simple calculation. Net operating income, NOI, divided by the property value or purchase price.
And NOI is?
NOI is the property's income, rents, etc. After you deduct all the operating expenses like property taxes, insurance, utilities if paid by owner, regular repairs, management fees, but before you account for your mortgage payments, debt service, or major capital expenses, CapEx like a new roof.
Okay, so what does cap rate tell you?
It gives you a measure of the unleveraged return, meaning the return as if you paid all cash for the property. It's primarily useful for comparing similar properties, like two apartment buildings in similar markets at a specific point in time.
They use Brenda's cap rate conundrum in Brandon to illustrate this, right?
Exactly. Brenda's comparing two apartment buildings. Building A has a projected NOI of $50,000 and is listed for $800,000, giving it a 6.25% cap rate, $50K, $800K. Building B has an NOI of $45,000 and is listed for $900,000, resulting in a 5.0% cap rate, $45K, $900K. Initially, just looking at the cap rate, Building A seems like the better deal with a higher rate.
There's more to the story.
Always. The book introduces Salty Sue's caution. Sue reminds Brenda that cap rate is just one tool and it's just a snapshot. While Building A has a higher cap rate on paper, maybe Building B is in a much better neighborhood, has newer infrastructure, less deferred maintenance, attracts higher quality tenants, and therefore has better long-term appreciation potential. So the lower 5% cap initial yield of Building B might actually represent a safer, more stable investment than the higher 6.25% cap of Building A, which might have hidden problems or be in a less desirable area.
So higher cap isn't always better.
Not necessarily. They emphasize that a higher cap can mean higher return or it could signal higher risk. And a lower cap can mean lower return or it could mean lower risk and higher perceived quality or future potential. It really requires deeper investigation beyond just that one number.
And they point out limitations too, like it doesn't include financing.
Right. Cap rate doesn't factor in your specific financing costs, which dramatically impact your actual cash flow and return on your invested cash. It doesn't include taxes you might pay on sale, and it doesn't account for future appreciation or any value-add plans you might have. It's a snapshot comparing potential unleveraged yields on similar properties, but doesn't tell the whole story of your investment. And importantly, cap rates vary hugely by city, property type, and current market conditions. You absolutely cannot directly compare a typical Vancouver multifamily cap rate to one in rural Saskatchewan and draw meaningful conclusions about which is better without a ton of context.
Okay, cap rate is one tool. What else?
Yeah.
DSCR.
Yes. DSCR, the debt service coverage ratio. This ratio is critical because lenders absolutely love it, especially when you get into multi-unit or commercial properties. It's calculated as net operating income, NOI, divided by the total annual debt service, which is your total principal and interest payments for the year.
And this tells the lender.
It shows how easily the property's own income can cover its mortgage payments. They bring in Larry the lender's DSCR decree again. Ricardo from Regina is refinancing his 6-unit building. His projected NOI is $70,000 per year, and his proposed annual debt service, principal plus interest, is $50,000. His DSCR is $70,000 divided by $50,000, which equals 1.40.
And Larry the lender likes 1.4.
Larry smiles. Because a 1.40 DSCR means the property generates 40% more income than is needed just to cover the mortgage payments. That's a healthy buffer. The book notes that most lenders for multi-unit or commercial properties want to see a DSCR of 1.20 or higher, preferably 1.25 or more.
Why does this matter so much to them?
Because a low DSCR, say below 1.1 or 1.2, makes lenders very hesitant. They might deny the loan or offer much worse terms, higher rates, lower loan amount. A strong DSCR is a key indicator to the bank that the property itself is financially healthy and capable of sustaining the debt comfortably, significantly increasing your chances of getting approved for financing and getting better terms. It shows the property can handle some vacancy or unexpected expenses without defaulting.
Makes sense. The book quickly recaps private lenders and MICs here too, just reinforcing they're a bridge.
Yeah, just a quick reminder that they are for when banks say, heck no, because of specific circumstances, unique properties, bruised credit, foreign investors, speed needed. Pros are speed and flexibility, cons are the higher rates, fees, and usually short terms. The actionable advice remains. Vet the lender thoroughly, always build a clear refinance exit strategy back to traditional financing, and ideally use them only as a temporary bridge, not a long-term solution.
And their bonus wisdom on analysis and financing creative deals is powerful. Creative reckless.
So important. They emphasize that while creative financing can unlock opportunities, it almost always means more complexity and higher cost. You must know your numbers inside and out, vet all your partners carefully, and draft airtight agreements. Never rely on a napkin contract, they warn. It's about being strategic and fully informed, not just trying something outside the box without understanding all the potential implications and risks.
Okay, you've got your mindset right, your finances are solid, you understand the financing options, and you know how to run the numbers to analyze a potential deal. Now comes the fun and maybe often frustrating part. The great Canadian property hunt, actually finding and securing that property. The book describes this as where preparation meets perspiration.
Yeah, hitting the streets, virtual or otherwise. They stress that before you even start looking at specific neighborhoods or scrolling through listings, you need to do your macro market recon. Be a mini economist and demographic detective for the area you're considering.
Look at the big picture first.
Exactly. Is the town or city you're looking at a rocket or a relic? Does it have a vibrant, diverse job market, or is it a one-trick pony relying heavily on a single industry? Are people generally flocking there or leaving? You need to look at fundamental data like population growth trends, demographics, employment rates and types, population growth relative to housing supply, absorption rates, how quickly homes are selling or renting, and maybe rent-to-price ratios. Does this market have solid long-term potential based on these fundamentals, or could it be fool's gold based on short-term hype?
Once you've identified a promising market and found a specific potential property, physical due diligence is absolutely non-negotiable.
Non-negotiable. This is the property's physical exam, and a thorough inspection by a qualified, reputable inspector is crucial. They share the story of diligent Dave's Dartmouth close call. Dave was looking at the century home that looked perfectly renovated on the surface, and he was tempted to waive the inspection condition because it was a competitive market.
Happens all the time.
But his spidey sense kicked in. He insisted on the inspection. And guess what? It revealed old, potentially dangerous knob and tube wiring hidden behind all the new drywall throughout the house. Dave walked away from the deal, saving himself potentially a massive 5-figure rewiring bill that he wouldn't have known about until after closing. It's far, far better to find these pre-existing conditions before you own the problem.
Absolutely. Beyond the physical inspection, there's legal due diligence and the essential final walkthrough.
Right. Legal diligence involves your lawyer reviewing things like the title search, to ensure the seller actually has clear ownership and there are no hidden loins or claims. The survey, or Real Property Report, RPR in Alberta, which shows property boundaries and improvements. And importantly, reviewing local zoning bylaws, which are the city's rule book for how the land can be used and what you can build, like trying to sneak a moose into a theater, you got to know the rules. And checking for building permits for any past major work.
And the final walkthrough. Why is that so important?
The final walkthrough, done usually the day before or day of closing, is essential to ensure the property is in the same condition as when you agreed to buy it, that any agreed-upon repairs were done, and that nothing major has broken or been removed. They share fastidious Frank's Fredericton drama. Just before closing, Frank did his final walkthrough and discovered the beautiful custom velvet drapes, which were specifically included in the purchase agreement, had been swapped out for cheap bed sheets by the seller.
No way.
Yes. A quick call to his lawyer, part of his essential power team, apparently ensured the correct drapes were reinstalled before the closing finalized. It catches last-minute issues.
Wow. Okay. Then comes negotiation and offer craftsmanship, the art of the deal.
Yeah, the book explains this isn't just about the purchase price. It's a complex dance involving terms, conditions, closing dates, and understanding the psychology of the seller if possible. You need to know when it makes sense to bid low versus when you need to come in strong and clean. You need to understand which conditions are non-negotiable for your protection, like financing, inspection, and maybe appraisal conditions usually, versus which ones you might be flexible on to make your offer more attractive to the seller in a competitive situation.
They mention things like escalation clauses.
They do, but advise using them with caution as they can be complex. They also talk about understanding seller motivations if you can, and the subtle power of a well-written personal letter to the seller, especially if it's their primary residence in a really competitive market. Actionable advice. Get pre-underwritten financing before you even make an offer, stronger than just pre-approval. Customize your offer based on what you know about the seller's needs, like maybe offering a flexible closing date. And carefully consider all the clauses, the deposit amount, and the timelines you propose.
Finally, they provide a closing checklist, guiding you through the last steps before you officially take ownership.
Yeah, practical stuff. Actionables. Hire your real estate lawyer early in the process. Ensure you review the statement of adjustments carefully. That's the final tally of credits and debits for things like property taxes and condo fees. Consider getting title insurance for protection against title defects. And absolutely, critically, do that final walkthrough just before the keys change hands.
The book's final takeaway on the property hunt seems to be that it's a high-stakes process. It combines rigorous analytics, emotional control, and maybe a healthy dose of distrust for those perfect listing photos.
Yes. But with the right playbook and preparation, it turns those daydreams into actually holding those long-awaited door keys.
You've successfully hunted, analyzed, financed, and closed on a property. Congratulations. Now, the reality sets in. You are officially a landlord and operator. This, as the book notes, is where the passive income dreams meet the active reality of running your empire.
Exactly. And the book makes it crystal clear that the most critical operational aspect, the one that will largely determine your success, your stress levels, and ultimately your profitability, is tenant acquisition and retention. They call it finding gold, not gremlins.
Love that. Finding gold, not gremlins.
Finding and keeping good, responsible tenants is absolutely key. Good tenants pay on time, they respect the property, they minimize headaches. Problem tenants, on the other hand, can turn your investment into an active nightmare with those dreaded 3 a.m. calls about plumbing issues, mysterious stains appearing on carpets, and very creative interpretations of your no pets policy.
So where do they start with tenants, human rights?
Yes, crucially. They start this section with a vital reminder about playing fair and understanding Canadian human rights legislation. You absolutely cannot discriminate against potential tenants based on protected grounds, which vary slightly by province but typically include race, religion, age, sex, family status, like having children or being single, disability, and sometimes receiving public assistance.
They share an example.
They do. Bernice's bias blunder in Burnaby. Bernice apparently posted an ad seeking a very specific tenant. Quiet, mature, single professional, no kids, no pets. She promptly received a letter from the BC Human Rights Tribunal because her ad discriminated based on family status, marital status, and age. She learned the hard way that her personal preferences cannot override human rights law.
Okay, so what can you screen for?
The book stresses that while you can't screen based on who someone is, those protected grounds, you absolutely can and must screen objectively based on their demonstrated ability to meet the obligations of the lease, things like their creditworthiness, verifying their income, and checking their landlord references. The key is to keep your screening process consistent and objective for all applicants. Focus on their ability to pay rent and care for the property.
This leads directly into tenant screening, which the book calls both an art and a science.
Yeah, thorough screening is your absolute best defense against future problems. They warn strongly. Don't be swayed by sob stories or flashy cars if the fundamental checks, credit, income references are weak. They contrast Penelope Pincher's paper-thin process.
Penny's back. Still having trouble.
Seems so. She was desperate to rent her problematic bungalow quickly, and she was charmed by a prospective tenant, Charming Charlie, who arrived with cash, a good story, and references written on a napkin. Penelope skipped the credit check and barely called the references, which turned out to be fake. Predictably, Charlie paid the first month's rent, moved in, and then stopped paying entirely. He was a professional tenant who knew how to game the system.
Ouch.
Compared to systematic Stan's super screening in Saskatoon, Stan, owning a duplex, had an ironclad process. He required a detailed application form. He ran a credit check via a reputable third-party service. He demanded income verification, pay stubs, employment letter, and critically, he called the previous 2 landlords with specific, prepared questions about payment history, property care, noise issues, and communication. He even did a quick, public social media scan just to look for glaring red flags.
That sounds thorough.
It took more effort up front, absolutely. But Stan's tenants were long-term and respectful, allowing Stan to actually enjoy his weekends. Penelope, meanwhile, was quickly becoming an unwilling expert in the intricacies of the Residential Tenancy Act and eviction processes.
So screening is key. Then comes the lease itself. The book calls the mighty lease your peace treaty.
Good term for it. This is the most important document in your landlord-tenant relationship. It's legally binding and clearly outlines the rights and responsibilities of both parties. They stress, don't skimp on this, they contrast Larry's loopholes in Lethbridge. Larry cut corners. He downloaded a vague, outdated template lease he found online somewhere, and it missed key provincial rules and clauses about things like cannabis use, which had recently become legal. Predictably, his tenant started growing an herb garden on the balcony and hosting loud band practices because the lease was silent on these issues and didn't properly reflect current Alberta law.
Versus Legal Lucy.
Versus Legal Lucy's airtight lease in Halifax. Lucy knew better. She used the current Nova Scotia provincial standard form of lease, which is mandatory there, and added a carefully reviewed addendum. This addendum specified rules about no smoking or vaping any substance anywhere inside the property or on balconies, detailed the pet policy specifics, clarified responsibilities for things like lawn care and snow removal, outlined quiet hours, and set clear rules about guests and consequences for late rent payments.
So details matter, and using the provincial form if required.
Absolutely. The book stresses that in provinces with mandatory standard lease forms like Ontario, BC, Quebec, Nova Scotia, and others, you must use them. Using your own can make parts of it unenforceable. Your provincial tenancy branch website is your best resource here, and they reiterate, The model leases and clauses they provide in the book are educational templates, not legal advice. You should always consult with a lawyer or paralegal licensed in your province to ensure your lease is compliant and covers your specific needs and property.
Okay, what about raising the rent? That always seems tricky.
It is. They tackle the rent increase tango, describing it as navigating a provincial patchwork of rules. This is a delicate dance because you need to cover increasing costs, taxes, insurance, maintenance, but you must follow the specific rules and regulations of your province regarding how much, how often, and with how much notice you can increase rent. Getting it wrong can lead to fines, legal challenges, and an illegal increase being invalidated, meaning you have to pay it back.
They contrast examples again.
Yes. Reginald's righteous and legal rent raise in Alberta. Alberta doesn't currently have a cap on the amount of rent increase for periodic month-to-month tenancies, but it has very strict rules about frequency, only once every 12 months, and notice 3 full months written notice is required. Reginald researched market comparables, calculated a fair increase based on the market, and gave the correct, timely written notice using the proper form, totally legal, compared to Gary's greedy and illegal gouge in Toronto. Ontario does have an annual rent increase guideline, a cap, for most rental units built before a certain date. Gary ignored this guideline, arbitrarily hiked the rent by 15% because he felt like it, and was immediately challenged by his tenant, who knew the rules. The landlord and tenant board would find Gary's increase invalid.
So you must know your province's rules.
Absolutely. The book stresses that key provincial variations include the allowable percentage increase, if any, how frequently you can increase, the required notice period, whether there are exemptions, often for newer buildings, and whether there's vacancy G control, allowing you to raise rent to market rates between tenants, which exists in some provinces but not others. Again, your best friend is your provincial tenancy branch or landlord-tenant board website. Ignorance of the law is absolutely not a defense.
Okay, beyond tenant issues, there's the practical side of property management and maintenance. Do you hire a pro or do it yourself?
The book discusses professional management versus self-management. They note the typical cost, around 8–10% of gross rents, feels expensive on paper, but they have a great quote. Back dollar is 10% of gross feels expensive, they write, until the first 3 a.m. sewer backup call.
Good point.
They argue that professional management can be a worthwhile lifestyle choice, buying back your valuable time and significantly reducing stress, especially if you have multiple properties or live far away. Trying to be penny-wise, portfolio poor by neglecting proper management, whether done by you or a pro, can cost you much more in the long run through higher vacancies, tenant issues, property damage, and potential legal problems.
And tied into maintenance is the CapEx crystal ball, planning for big stuff, capital expenditures.
Super important, often overlooked. CapEx refers to those major, infrequent, expensive repairs or replacements, think like roofs, furnaces, windows, maybe major appliance overhauls, caving a driveway. It's distinct from OPEX, which is your day-to-day operating expenses like minor plumbing repairs or cleaning gutters. Ignoring CapEx planning is described as playing financial Russian roulette with your investment.
They use Penelope again, still learning lessons.
Penelope's back for a trifecta. Penelope's painful HVAC predicament in Moncton. She was apparently enjoying the monthly cash flow from her rental property, but hadn't been setting aside any money specifically for future CapEx. Her 25-year-old furnace predictably died suddenly in the middle of January. She was hit with a $6,000 emergency replacement bill and had no dedicated fund. She had to scramble, maybe take out a high-interest line of credit, which wiped out her cash flow for months and caused immense stress.
Compared to Prepared Paul.
Compared to Prepared Paul's planned perfection in Peterborough, Paul owned several properties and maintained a dedicated CapEx reserve fund for each property. He systematically estimated the remaining useful life, RUL, and eventual replacement cost of all major components, roof, furnace, water heater, etc., for each building. He then calculated the annual and monthly savings needed for each component across his portfolio and diligently transferred $400 to $500 per month per property into a separate high-interest savings account specifically earmarked for CapEx. So when a furnace died at one of his properties, he calmly wrote a check from that property's reserve fund. His overall cash flow barely blipped, and he slept soundly. Big difference.
So how do you forecast CapEx?
The book details a simple process. List all the major components of your property: roof, HVAC, windows, flooring, appliances, etc. Estimate their current age and remaining useful life. Your initial home inspection report is a great starting point for this. Get realistic estimates for the replacement cost. Get quotes now, or research online, adjusting for future inflation. calculate the annual savings needed, replacement cost divided by remaining useful life. Then, consistently save that amount monthly or annually into a separate account specifically for that property's future CapEx needs.
They also advocate for preventative maintenance.
Strongly. Scheduling routine tasks like annual HVAC servicing, regular gutter cleanouts, checking for small leaks seasonally. They suggest creating a seasonal checklist. The goal is to replace expensive, stressful, reactive panic repairs with planned, budgeted, preventative plan maintenance. Actionable advice: create a routine and seasonal maintenance schedule for your property and stick to it.
Their conclusion on operations seems to be that maintenance and CapEx planning aren't the glamorous parts of real estate.
Definitely not.
But they are absolutely fundamental to long-term success, profitability, and frankly, your sanity as an investor. A well-maintained property with a healthy CapEx reserve means fewer emergencies, happier long-term tenants, protected property value, and sound sleep for you. You don't need to be Bob the Builder yourself. You need to be Bob the Budgeter, Bob the Planner, and Bob the Call the Right Personer.
Well put. The property takes care of your cash flow if you take good care of the property.
That's a great point. You're managing the asset, not necessarily swinging the hammer every single weekend unless you want to.
Yeah.
And speaking of adding value to that asset, the book highlights value-add investing, which they call the secret sauce for potentially more rapid portfolio growth. This is how you create forced appreciation rather than just sitting back and waiting for the market to hopefully lift values over time.
Yeah, taking control of the appreciation. They break down value add into the renovation spectrum. Not all renovations are created equal in terms of cost, effort, and return on investment. First, there's cosmetic, weekend warrior renovations. These are relatively low cost. Quick updates, things like fresh paint, neutrals are key. Installing durable flooring. Luxury vinyl plank, or LVP, is described as a landlord's best friend for its durability and look.
LVP is everywhere now.
It really is. Updating light fixtures, cabinet hardware, maybe reglazing an old bathtub, improving curb appeal with some landscaping. These cosmetic touches often offer a great return on investment because they can attract better quality tenants, justify higher rents, or significantly increase the perceived value for a future sale or refinance appraisal.
They use Connie's Cosmetic Co. in Corner Brook as an example.
Yeah. Connie bought a property that was structurally sound but very dated. Think avocado bathroom fixtures and orange shag carpet, which was scaring off potential tenants. For about $12,000, she painted everything neutral, installed LVP flooring throughout, updated all the light fixtures and hardware, painted the existing kitchen cabinets and added new hardware, and had the tub reglazed and put in a new vanity. The book says the transformation was astonishing. The property appraised for $35,000 more than her combined purchase and renovation cost, and she attracted great tenants who paid $300 more per month in rent than she originally thought possible. Huge ROI on cosmetic work.
Nice. At the other end of the spectrum are structural repositions, or the full Monty.
Right. These involve significant, much more expensive work, like moving load-bearing walls, adding bathrooms where none existed, completely reconfiguring the floor plan. They are expensive, very time-consuming, and almost always require architectural plans and building permits. They are definitely not for the faint-hearted or inexperienced investor, but in the right property and the right market, they can unlock massive value.
Steve's Structural Super Slam in Saskatoon is their example.
Yes. Steve was an experienced investor who bought a legally zoned duplex that was structurally sound, but laid out like a rabbit warren inside with a terrible, inefficient floor plan. He undertook a complex 6-month, $150,000 structural renovation project. He knocked down walls to create a modern open-concept layout upstairs, added a new bathroom, and completely reconfigured and renovated the downstairs unit as well. The result: the property appraised for a whopping $250,000 more than its total purchase and renovation cost. Plus, he was able to attract high-quality tenants paying much higher rents, dramatically improving his cash flow and overall return. Steve knew the risks involved, but he also knew the local market would support the higher finishes and rents he achieved.
These value-add strategies are often core to the BRRRR strategy, right? Buy, reno, rent, refinance, repeat.
Exactly. BRRRR is a popular strategy specifically designed to manufacture equity through value add. You buy an underperforming property below market value, you renovate it strategically to increase its value, you rent it out to good tenants at market rates, you refinance a property based on its new, higher appraised value, ideally pulling out your original investment plus maybe some profit, tax-free, and then you repeat the process with another property.
What's the actionable advice for BRRRR?
Estimate your after repair value, ARV, realistically before you even buy the property or start the renovation. Ensure the market rents for your planned finished project will be strong enough to support the higher appraised value needed for the refinance to work. And critically, work with mortgage brokers and lenders who are familiar and friendly with the BRRRR strategy, as not all lenders understand or like financing these types of deals, especially the refinance part.
The book also offers crucial warnings for avoiding renovation regret.
Yes. Don't over-improve for the neighborhood, match the expectations and price point of the market you're in. Spending money on high-end finishes might not give you a return if the local market won't support the corresponding rent or sale price. Get multiple quotes from qualified contractors and always use detailed written contracts. And a major warning they repeat: never skip required building permits for work that needs them, like structural changes, plumbing, electrical. Seriously, ignoring permits can lead to massive headaches down the road, stop work orders, fines, problems with insurance claims, and major issues when you eventually try to sell the property. Just don't do it.
Their final takeaway on value add seems to be that it's the process of converting your sweat equity, or your project management skill in hiring and overseeing others, into tangible net worth. It's a powerful secret sauce, but only if it's done with thorough due diligence, realistic budgeting, and a deep understanding of the market. Forced appreciation, when done correctly, is where a lot of the magic and potentially significant wealth creation in real estate can happen.
Absolutely. It's taking active control over increasing the value.
Building your property empire is one thing, but protecting it from potential risks, whether that's a lawsuit from a tenant slipping on ice or just minimizing your tax bill legally, is equally vital, even if it's not the most sexy topic, as they say. The book dedicates a section to protecting your pile.
Yeah, not sexy, but absolutely essential. They make it clear. If you ignore tax strategy and asset protection planning, you're essentially hosting an open house for the taxman and Murphy's Law. The law that says anything that can go wrong will go wrong. They use the analogy of building a financial fortress that needs more than just strong walls. It needs fire insurance, maybe a good financial prenup with partners, and definitely a good lawyer on retainer.
A key concept they explain for Canadian rental property owners is CCA, or capital cost allowance. What is that exactly?
CCA is basically Canada's version of depreciation for tax purposes. You can deduct a portion of the rental building's cost. Importantly, you can't claim CCA on the land value, only the building, against your rental income each year. This deduction reduces your taxable rental income for that year.
Sounds good. Is there a catch?
There is, and it's called recapture. When you eventually sell the property, if you sell it for more than its undepreciated capital cost, UCC, which is basically your original building cost minus all the CCA you've claimed over the years, the amount of CCA you previously claimed, up to the original cost of the building, is added back to your income in the year of sale and taxed as regular income. It's not technically a penalty, just the government recapturing the past deductions now that you've sold for a gain, but it can result in a significant tax bill in the year of sale if you haven't planned for it.
So what's the actionable advice on CCA?
Understand how CCA works for buildings. Class 1 is the usual rate. You can choose how much CCA to claim each year, up to the maximum allowed. Often, advisors suggest claiming just enough CCA to bring your net taxable rental income down to zero, but not necessarily create a rental loss unless you have other passive income to offset. Understand the concept of recapture so you can plan for the tax implications upon sale. And definitely consult a tax advisor experienced with rental properties annually to discuss the best CCA strategy for your specific situation and long-term goals. It's not always best to claim the maximum CCA every year.
Next is ownership structures they strongly advise against being a bare-bones Betty.
Right. How you legally own your investment properties matters significantly for liability protection. They use the example of Barebones Betty in Brandon, who apparently held 10 rental properties all in her own personal name. When there was a nasty slip and fall lawsuit at one of her properties, the potential judgment wasn't limited to that one property. It put all her personal assets, her primary home, her savings, everything at risk because there was no legal separation between her personal assets and her business assets, the rentals.
Oof. Compared to Incorporated Ian.
Compared to Incorporated Ian from Innisfail, who owned each of his small multifamily properties in a separate corporation. While incorporation isn't a completely impenetrable shield, owning properties in corporations or potentially other structures like limited partnerships, LPs, can offer a valuable layer of liability protection, helping to separate the risks of one property from your other assets and your personal finances.
So you need to evaluate the options.
Definitely. The book stresses the need to evaluate the pros and cons of owning in your personal name versus setting up a corporation or maybe a limited partnership or trust based on your goals, the number of properties you plan to own, your overall net worth, and your personal risk tolerance. For larger portfolios, owning properties in separate legal entities is often recommended to help compartmentalize risk. Actionable. Work with a lawyer experienced in both real estate and corporate structuring early on to ensure your property titles and ownership structures align with your long-term strategy and risk management goals. Don't just default to personal name without considering the implications.
And finally, under protection, estate and succession planning. Your legacy.
Yeah, planning for what happens to your assets after you're gone. As they bluntly put it, you can't take it with you, and if you don't plan, there could be a significant otherworldly capital gains tax event upon your death.
How does that work in Canada?
In Canada, upon death, the Canada Revenue Agency, CRA, generally considers you to have sold all your capital property, including rentals, stocks, etc., but usually excluding your principal residence, at fair market value right before you depart. This deemed disposition can trigger capital gains tax on all the accrued appreciation over the years, which your estate would then have to pay. They also mention things like probate fees, which vary by province and can be significant, and specific tax rules like Section 85 rollovers, a Canadian tax rule allowing deferral of taxes when transferring assets to a Canadian corporation under certain conditions, often used in succession planning. They also briefly mention the 1031 exchange, just to clarify that it's a U.S. rule for deferring capital gains on U.S. property sales and is not applicable directly for Canadian properties in Canada.
So the actual advice is,
don't avoid this topic just because it's uncomfortable. Plan your legacy. Critically, consult with legal and financial professionals who specialize in estate planning, especially if you have significant assets like real estate, to understand the tax implications upon your death and explore strategies to potentially minimize taxes and ensure a smooth transition of assets to your heirs or chosen beneficiaries.
the summary of this whole protection section seems clear. You don't need to become a tax lawyer or an insurance underwriter yourself.
Definitely not.
But you absolutely must understand these basic concepts and hire the right professionals. A good real estate lawyer, a knowledgeable accountant or tax advisor, experienced with rental properties, maybe an insurance broker, to build and maintain your financial fortress. Tax planning and asset protection aren't optional extras. They are fundamental pillars of successful, sustainable, long-term investing. Seasoned investors sleep soundly because they've addressed these things proactively. Newbies are often up late, Googling CRA audit survival tips. Own your assets wisely from the start.
Well said. It's about being proactive, not reactive.
So what about when you've built a solid base with maybe a few single-family homes or small plexes and you're ready to think bigger? The book talks about scaling up and entering the big sandbox of multifamily properties, typically defined as 5+ units, and potentially commercial real estate like office or retail. This sounds like a different game entirely.
It absolutely is. It fundamentally changes how financing works, for starters. The book explains that the underwriting goes full financial autopsy.
Yeah, financial autopsy.
The shift is significant. Lenders move from primarily focusing on your personal T4 income and credit score, how's your T4, for a single-family rental, to intensely scrutinizing the property's historical and projected ability to generate income and cover its own expenses. Can the building pay its own mortgage and operating costs? Lenders underwrite the property first and foremost in these larger deals.
So you need more documentation.
A lot more. You need to be ready with professional documentation. Things like certified rent rolls, showing current tenants, lease terms, rents paid, multi-year historical operating statements showing actual income and expenses, detailed expense reports, potentially tenant lease agreements, and a well-supported projected pro forma, including a calculated DSCR, debt service coverage ratio, which we discussed earlier, becomes even more critical here. Actionable. Start thinking like a lender yourself. Underwrite the property's performance rigorously using historical data and realistic projections, and be prepared with all the necessary documentation organized and ready to go. And yes, as they joke, practice your poker face, because for larger properties, especially commercial, they might require Phase I environmental site assessments too.
When you're buying these larger properties, you'll inevitably get a pro forma from the seller, which is their projection of income and expenses. The book warns this often comes from the Department of Wishful Thinking and tends to be overly optimistic, right?
Very much so. They call the necessary work you need to do the pro forma polka, adjusting sellers' numbers. You have to dance around their rosy projections and find the reality.
They use the contrast between Slick Sal's seductive spreadsheet And realistic regs, rigorous recalculation in red deer.
Yeah, great example. Slick Sal is selling a 25-unit apartment building, and his pro forma spreadsheet shows incredibly optimistic numbers designed to make the deal look amazing. Maybe a ridiculously low 1% vacancy rate, my tenants never leave. An impossibly low 200-unit budget for repairs and maintenance. This building practically heals itself. A 0% property management fee because Sal claims he manages it himself between his llama grooming appointments and competitive cheese sculpting.
Llama grooming, AD cheese sculpting. Sal's busy.
Apparently. And crucially, absolutely no budget line item for future capital expenditures. Our roofs are forever. Based on these highly questionable numbers, Sal is advertising a juicy 9% cap rate.
But realistic reg knows better.
Realistic Reg drills down. Reg creates his own stabilized or normalized pro forma, adjusting Sal's numbers to reflect market reality and prudent underwriting. He calls local property managers to get a realistic vacancy rate for that specific area and property type. Maybe it's actually 6-7%. He budgets for professional property management, say 7% of gross rental income, which is standard for underwriting, even if Reg plans to self-manage initially because the bank will underwrite it, assuming professional management costs. He budgets a much more realistic R&M allowance based on the building's age and condition. Maybe 800 unit per year is more appropriate. He adds a robust CapEx reserve, perhaps 600 unit per year, set aside for the inevitable future boiler, roof, and window replacements. And importantly, he verifies the actual property taxes and insurance costs with current statements, not just relying on the seller's potentially lowballed numbers.
And after reg does all that.
After these realistic adjustments, Sal's advertised 9% cap rate might plummet to a more earthly but achievable 6.2%. Reg bases his offer and valuation on this realistic 6.2% cap rate derived from his own thorough underwriting, and he's prepared to walk away if Sal isn't willing to negotiate based on the property's actual potential performance, not just the fantasy numbers.
So the key pro forma adjustments are:
always scrutinize and adjust for realistic vacancy and potential credit loss, unpaid rent. Always include a standard professional management fee for underwriting purposes, even if you plan to self-manage. Normalize the repairs and maintenance budget based on the property's specifics, not wishful thinking. Include a robust capital expenditure reserve for future big-ticket items, and always verify actual property taxes and insurance costs independently. Never take the seller's pro forma at face value.
For these multi-million-dollar deals, the financing isn't just one simple mortgage anymore, it's typically layered. The book describes this as the lasagna of loans, understanding capital stacks.
Financial lasagna. I like it. It's a good analogy. For larger deals, the financing is often a stack of different types of capital, each with a different level of risk, expected return, and repayment priority, just like layers in a lasagna.
They use the Grandview Gardens syndicate stack in Guelph as an example, buying a 100-unit building for $25 million.
Right. So imagine the layers from the bottom, lowest risk for the lender, first to get paid back, to the top, highest risk for the investor, last to get paid, but with the highest potential return. First layer, senior debt, the meat sauce, maybe 65-75% of the value. This might be around $17.5 million, 70% loan to value from a major Canadian bank, and on a multifamily building of this size, it would likely be CMHC insured. This is the lowest risk layer for the lender. It has the lowest interest rate, is secured by a first charge or first mortgage on the property, and gets paid back first before any other capital in the stack if things go wrong.
Okay, safest layer.
Second layer, mezzanine debt preferred equity. The ricotta and spinach layer, maybe 10-20%. This could be around $3.75 million, another 15% LTV, coming from a specialized debt fund or financial institution. This capital is riskier than senior debt because it sits behind it. It commands a higher interest rate, maybe 8-12%, and might also include an equity kicker, like a small share of the profits when the property is sold or refinanced. It's secured by a second charge or sits just above the common equity. It gets paid back after the senior debt is fully paid, but before the equity investors see a dime. This is the medium risk, medium return layer. Top layer, common equity. The Parmesan and mozzarella topping, maybe 10-20%. This is the remaining $3.75 million. The final 15% LTV needed to reach the $25 Hammond purchase price. This capital is typically provided by the general partner, GP, the deal sponsor or manager, like Gerald in their example, and the limited partners, LPs, the passive investors who contribute capital but don't manage the deal. This equity layer has no fixed payment expectation like the debt layers. The equity investors share the remaining cash flow, if any is left after paying all operating expenses and debt service, and the profits when the property is eventually sold or refinanced. This capital is last in line to be paid back if the deal goes sideways. It's the highest risk layer, but it also has the highest potential for return, all the upside potential after the bet is paid.
Understanding this capital stack seems crucial, especially if you're considering investing passively as a limited partner in one of these multifamily syndication deals.
Absolutely critical. You need to know exactly where your investment sits in terms of risk and repayment priority. Are you in the relatively safer preferred equity layer or the higher risk, higher reward common equity layer? And if you're the one structuring the deal as a GP, you need to understand what types of capital you can realistically attract at each layer of the stack.
Speaking of investing passively in a syndicate, the book makes a critically important point. Your #1 job as an LP is doing thorough operator due diligence on the general partner of the GP.
Yes, if you invest passively in a syndicate, you are betting heavily on the jockey, the GP who is actively managing the deal and your money, as much as, if not more than, the horse, the property itself. Your most important job as a potential LP is rigorously vetting the GP.
They contrast diligent Diana's deep dive in Dartmouth.
Yeah. Diana was considering a $100,000 investment with a GP group called Maritime Mega Managers, Inc. Before committing a single dollar, Diana did extensive due diligence on the GP. She dug deep into their verified track record. Had they successfully completed similar deals before? What were the actual verified returns to investors on those past deals? She even went so far as to call LPs from different past deals to ask about their experience working with this GP. She ran background checks, any past lawsuits, bankruptcies, regulatory sanctions against the principals. She meticulously scrutinized their business plan and assumptions for the current deal she was considering. Were the projected rents realistic for the market? Was the renovation budget and timeline credible? Were there adequate contingencies built in? She assessed their team capabilities. Did the principals and their team have genuine expertise in property acquisition, management, construction, oversight, finance? She worked hard to fully understand the fee structure and alignment. Exactly how is the GP getting paid? Were the fees reasonable compared to industry standards? Critically, how much of their own end cash was the GP personally investing in this deal alongside the LPs? You want to see significant skin in the game, and she reviewed their proposed communication and reporting style for LPs. Thorough.
Compared to trusting Trevor.
Compared to trusting Trevor's tragic tumble in Terrace, BC, Trevor saw a slick online presentation from Guru Gary's Get Rich group promising guaranteed 30%, returns on some revolutionary real estate project in a remote location. There was a flashy website, a very charismatic Guru Gary leading the presentation, and lots of pressure tactics creating a limited time urgency to invest now. Trevor, seduced by the flash and the unrealistic promises, apparently wired his $50,000 investment cash without asking any of the tough questions Diana asked.
And the outcome for Trevor?
Predictably tragic. The project stalled indefinitely. Guru Gary blamed vague, unforeseen market conditions, while rumors of him buying a new yacht circulated. And Trevor's $50,000 investment started to look more like an unintentional donation to Guru Gary's lifestyle fund.
Ouch. So the book provides red flags to watch for when vetting a GP.
Yes, very clearly. Red flags include a vague or unproven track record. They can't show you successfully completed similar deals with verified results. Unrealistic or guaranteed returns. Nothing is guaranteed in real estate investing. High, opaque, or poorly aligned fees. The GP gets paid big fees regardless of whether the LPs make money. A lack of transparency or unwillingness to answer detailed questions. Insufficient GP skin in the game. If they aren't risking a meaningful amount of their own capital alongside yours, they might be less careful with your money. And using high-pressure sales tactics or creating artificial urgency to force a quick investment decision. If you see these, proceed with extreme caution, or more likely, just walk away.
And speaking of GP pay, they emphasize the importance of understanding the fees that GPs charge, as these directly impact the net returns that actually flow down to the limited partners.
Absolutely. GPs don't work for free, nor should they if they're creating value. But it's crucial for LPs to understand all the potential fees that can chip away at the deal's profitability before it reaches them. Common fees mentioned include acquisition fees, often 1–2% of the property purchase price, paid up front, asset management fees, an ongoing fee, maybe 1–2% of the gross rental income, or 0.51% of the total assets under management value annually. Property management fees, if the GP's company also manages the property, maybe 3–5% of gross income for larger multifamily, potentially 8–10% for smaller properties. Construction or development fees, if it's a value-add project. Financing or refinancing fees when they arrange debt. And disposition fees, maybe 1% of the property sale price when they eventually sell. Understanding how these fees are calculated and when they are paid is critical for LPs assessing the true potential return.
Finally, in this scaling section, they briefly touch on infill development, which seems like a big part of Canadian urban real estate.
Yeah, it's very relevant here. This involves building new housing on vacant or underutilized lots within established neighborhoods. Think tearing down an old single bungalow and building a new duplex or small townhouse complex in its place, or adding laneway or garden suites in backyards where permitted. The pros: you leverage existing infrastructure, roads, sewers, schools. These are often desirable, walkable neighborhoods. It contributes to neighborhood revitalization and increases housing density gently. The cons, often working on tight, constrained sites, can face restrictive zoning bylaws and neighborhood design guidelines trying to maintain local character, potential imbyism, not in my backyard, from existing residents who oppose change, and sometimes the older infrastructure in the area needs expensive upgrades to support the new density. It's a complex but important part of how our cities grow.
Wow, that was a comprehensive tour through the world of scaling up into bigger deals. Definitely sounds like moving from a couple of rental houses into 25-unit buildings or syndications involves a completely different level of analysis, financing complexity, and due diligence.
It absolutely does. It's a significant step up. It's a move from applying residential investment principles layered with small business operations towards employing much more sophisticated financial structures, rigorous property performance analysis techniques, and often relying on a team of specialists.
So looking ahead, the book also touches briefly on the future of real estate and, maybe most importantly, provides some incredibly practical, actionable tools in its appendices to help people actually implement what they've learned.
Right. The future section is just a glimpse, but it highlights some interesting emerging trends and potential disruptions. Digitalization is one. They contrast concepts like maybe a crypto Carl in Waterloo, trying to tokenize ownership shares in multifamily properties, versus a traditional Trudy in Truro, who still prefers holding physical paper deeds in a vault. It's about that ongoing clash between old school methods and new technologies potentially impacting asset ownership, transactions, and management.
And the increasing role of AI, the rise of real estate robots.
Yeah, AI is definitely making inroads. AI-driven automated valuation models, AVMs, are becoming more common, sometimes competing with traditional human appraisers. The question is, can an algorithm truly value the unique character of a heritage property or accurately spot hidden deferred maintenance issues that a seasoned human appraiser might catch with their smell test?
Good question.
AI is also popping up in property management tasks, like optimizing maintenance schedules or communicating with tenants, tenant screening algorithms, and even attempts to predict neighborhood gentrification or market shifts. The book asks, will AI ultimately replace humans in these roles or become an essential sidekick? They contrast an algorithm Annie, who runs an AVM startup and believes her models outperform humans in dynamic markets like Vancouver, with an old-school Owen, a 30-year veteran appraiser who relies heavily on his experience and local vibes. The book suggests the truth, for now at least, is likely somewhere in between. The unbeatable duo might be Annie's data-crunching power combined with Owen's nuanced human judgment and local knowledge.
What are the risks with AI, though?
The potential risks they mention include inherent bias baked into the algorithms based on historical data, gaps in the data AI relies on, especially for unique properties, and the lack of nuanced human judgment or ability to account for unique circumstances. Actionable advice here. Use AI tools as part of your research and analysis toolkit. They can be very powerful for spotting trends or doing initial evaluations, but always apply your own human override, critical thinking, and local knowledge. Don't blindly trust the algorithm.
They also briefly but importantly touch on climate catastrophes and canny construction.
Yeah, this is becoming impossible to ignore. Mother Nature is getting, as they colorfully put it, spicy. We see it with the increasing frequency and severity of wildfires in BC and the prairies, major floods like the one in Abbotsford a few years back, intense storms hitting the Maritimes. Climate risk is a very real and increasing financial danger for property owners.
And that impacts things like insurance.
Hugely. It's leading to significant insurance challenges, skyrocketing premiums, or even difficulty getting coverage at all in high-risk areas. The book highlights the growing importance of considering climate risk when buying property and the need for more resilient design and construction techniques to help properties withstand future climate events. Resilience, they argue, is becoming the new ROI. Actionable. When analyzing potential properties, consciously assess their vulnerability to local climate risks like floodplains, wildfire zones, coastal erosion, or severe storm impacts. This needs to be part of your due diligence now.
Okay, that's a sobering but really important look ahead. But the book isn't just theory and future trends. It's packed with these practical tools in the back. They highlight several key ones from the appendices, right?
Yes, exactly. These tools are designed to help the reader immediately take action and apply the concepts discussed throughout the book. First, there's the From Zero to Hero 90-Day Launch Plan.
Sends into
It's designed as your personal roadmap, your step-by-step Sherpa for starting your property quest if you're feeling overwhelmed. It distills the entire starting process into weekly action items. For example, weeks 1-2. Focus on figuring out your personal why for investing and taking that honest financial selfie, net worth, budget. Weeks 3-4. Work on financial fortification, building emergency fund, improving credit. Start interviewing potential power team members, mortgage broker, or realtor. Weeks 5-6. Get lender ready, pre-approval. Clearly define your target market and specific property investment criteria. Weeks 7-10. Start the actual property hunt. Set up MLS alerts, maybe do some driving for dollars, looking for opportunities. Actively work with your realtor. Weeks 9-10. Deep dive into analysis bootcamp. Practice using the deal analysis worksheet on real listings. Practice your physical and legal due diligence checklists. Weeks 11-12. Offer time. Learn how to craft and submit a strong offer. Practice negotiation strategies, figuring out if you're a Bulldog Brenda or a Smooth Susan. By day 90 and beyond, the goal isn't necessarily to have bought something, but either to have an accepted offer in hand or, just as importantly, to have built a robust, repeatable system for finding, analyzing, and making offers on deals going forward.
They contrast paralyzed Percy with launched Linda.
Yes. Paralyzed Percy, who apparently read 73 books on real estate but never bought a single property because he was stuck in analysis paralysis, versus launched Linda in Lethbridge, who followed the 90-day plan and 3 months later was dealing with her first tenant issue involving an unauthorized miniature pig named Kevin Bacon.
Kevin Bacon the pig. That's definitely progress, though maybe smelly progress.
Progress nonetheless. Next tool is the Deal or Dud Deal Analysis Worksheet. This is positioned as your indispensable spreadsheet sidekick. It contains pre-baked formulas for calculating all the key financial metrics discussed in Chapter 8. NOI, cash-on-cash return, DSCR, maybe even internal rate of return, IRR. It has intuitive sections where you can plug in all the relevant numbers. Property vitals, address, type, size, purchase details, price, closing costs, financing assumptions, down payment, interest rate, amortization, detailed potential income, rent per unit, other income like parking or laundry, and crucially, a realistic line item for vacancy allowance. All the operating expenses, OPEX, property taxes, insurance, utilities, repairs and maintenance, property management fees, and that vital line item for your ongoing CapEx reserve savings. The magic output then calculates the key metrics like cash flow, COSI return, DSCR, to help you objectively assess if the numbers actually work for this specific deal based on your inputs.
Does it allow for what-ifs?
Yes, often they include what-if, wizardry, sensitivity analysis toggles, where you can easily adjust key variables like the assumed vacancy rate, the interest rate, or future repair costs to instantly see how those changes impact your projected cash flow and returns. It's like having a financial crystal ball, but one that requires you to feed it realistic data, not just wishful thinking. The book's pro tip here is blunt. If the property doesn't show positive cash flow, using a reasonably conservative interest rate assumption, like maybe 1-2% higher than current best rates, say 7.5% in today's market, even if today's rates are lower, it's probably not a solid long-term investment deal. It might just be expensive decor. It needs to work under stress.
Good reality check. And to combat the impulse to buy based just on those glossy listing photos, they offer the Leave No Stone Unturned due diligence checklists.
Right. These are designed to be your property x-ray goggles. Buying based just on pretty pictures and the seller's charming smile is, as they say repeatedly, potentially disastrous. These checklists are designed as your sober second thought, forcing you to be systematic. They provide detailed, printable checklist templates covering different property types. Residential, covering physical aspects, roof, foundation, HVAC, electrical, explicitly looking for old knob and tube wiring, plumbing, insulation, windows, financial checks, reviewing past utility bills, property tax statements, legal checks, title search review, survey RPR, zoning compliance, permit history, and if the property is currently tenanted, reviewing existing leases, getting estoppel certificates from tenants confirming lease terms. Multifamily includes all the residential checks, plus reviewing certified rent rolls and detailed operating statements for the past 2-3 years, reviewing existing service contracts like elevators or laundry, checking fire safety compliance, and often getting a Phase I environmental site assessment, ESA, especially for older or larger buildings. Condos, STRs, Scrutinizing condo documents, bylaws, financial statements, reserve fund study is critical. Checking municipal licensing rules for short-term rentals. Ensuring proper STR insurance is obtainable. Commercial requires even more detailed lease reviews. Understanding tenant obligations, expiry dates, renewal options, often Phase 1 and sometimes Phase 2 ESAs, potentially structural engineering reports, and detailed market studies.
Wow, comprehensive. Helps avoid that, oops, forgot to check for the ancient burial ground moment.
Exactly. No more oops moments after closing, hopefully. Finally, they include the Clarity's Kindness, Model Leases and Clauses Appendix. They emphasize again that a well-drafted, clear lease is the foundation of a smooth landlord-tenant relationship and acts as your essential peace treaty. A vague lease, like poor Larry's earlier, inevitably leads to interpretive dance arguments and potentially expensive legal disputes.
And these are templates, not legal advice.
Absolutely crystal clear on that point. They provide educational templates, explicitly stating they are not legal advice. You must consult a licensed legal professional in your specific province. These templates cover model standard sections you'd expect. Parties, premises description, term length, rent amount due, date payment methods, strongly suggesting e-transfer. They highlight the importance of correctly handling security and damage deposits, stressing that the rules and allowable amounts vary significantly by province, and you must adhere strictly to your local regulations. They cover clauses for utilities, maintenance responsibilities, who does lawn care snow removal, conditions for landlord entry, and general rules, covering pets, smoking, guests, alterations.
And customizable clauses, too.
Yes, they provide examples of customizable addendum clauses to cover common specific issues. A detailed bet policy, specifying type, size, number, behavior expectations, maybe explicitly prohibiting llamas, alligators, or circus monkeys just in case. A very strict no smoking, no cannabis policy, explicitly stating non-smoking vaping of any substance anywhere indoors, including common areas or on balconies, and prohibiting cultivation. Clauses that mirror provincial laws regarding subletting and assignment of the lease, and parking particulars, assigning specific spots, prohibiting storage of derelict snowmobiles. These templates are designed to spark ideas, cover common bases often missed in basic leases, and help landlords create clearer, more robust agreements. But the book firmly directs readers back to their provincial landlord tenant board website for any mandatory forms and reiterates the need for local legal counsel to review and customize any lease used.
That toolkit sounds incredibly practical. It really reinforces that the book intends to move people from just understanding the philosophical why of real estate investing to the practical how, and provides the concrete resources to actually explain the plan.
It really does. It effectively bridges that gap between understanding the core concepts and actually taking confident, informed action, providing useful frameworks for analysis, due diligence, planning, and ongoing management of properties.
So reflecting on everything we've unpacked from brick by brick today,
Wow.
from the core philosophy and those tricky psychological traps, to building your essential financial base, navigating the complex world of financing, both traditional and alternative, learning how to properly analyze potential deals, understanding the realities of operating properties day to day, protecting your hard-earned assets, strategies for scaling up to larger deals, and even getting a glimpse into the future of real estate, all supported by those practical tools. It's a truly comprehensive playbook for the Canadian context.
It really is. And the book's core message, the thread woven consistently throughout all these diverse sections, is that building wealth through real estate here in Canada is absolutely achievable for almost anyone, but it requires deliberate, consistent effort. It's definitely not magic, and it's certainly not about just getting lucky in a hot market cycle. It requires education, consistent discipline, maintaining a long-term perspective, and crucially, building a solid team of qualified professionals around you.
So for you listening, you now have some deep insights into this powerful playbook, distilled directly from the author's extensive experience and research. The journey they map out isn't just about the single transaction of acquiring a property. It's fundamentally about making smart, informed decisions at every single step, building resilience to inevitable market cycles, and committing yourself to continuous learning and practical application of these principles.
And their final push, that call to action, is really powerful. Don't be a paralyzed Percy, stuck forever in analysis paralysis, endlessly reading books and blogs, but never actually taking that first step. Start applying these concepts, even in small ways. Even if it's just calculating your true net worth tonight, tracking your expenses diligently for just 1 week to find those leaks, or analyzing one hypothetical deal you see online using their worksheet framework just for practice.
Building wealth brick by brick, as the title suggests, isn't about finding that one elusive perfect deal that makes you rich overnight. It's about consistently applying sound principles and discipline over time, methodically laying one solid brick after another on your financial foundation.
So maybe the final thought to leave you with is this. Think about your own financial journey, where you are right now, and where you might want real estate to potentially take you in the future. What is the very next smallest brick? That single, concrete, actionable step you can lay on your unique path towards building real estate wealth, starting today or this week.